While 19th century police believed that a serial killer was a homicidal maniac, this view would be expanded in the 20th century, when 70 more suspects would be named as Jack the Ripper. The name Jack the Ripper has come to symbolize terror the world over. Stories about this phantom of death are so compelling that even the great master of the macabre, Alfred Hitchcock, based his very first film on the well-known tale of a lodger, mistakenly thought to be the Ripper. In his film, Jack is called the Avenger.
We're officers from Scotland Yard. What's your name? George Bunting.
In 1932, director Maurice Elvey produced his version of the same plot, The Phantom Fiend.
You stay here. Show us the room. Come along.
Movies entertain us with Jack the Ripper mythology, but theories abound. Speculation is fair game.
I could give you a lovely story that Oscar Wilde was Jack the Ripper. Nobody's ever suggested it, but take it from me, he wasn't.
The only person who hasn't been dragged in yet, and well, I'm just waiting for it to happen, I've thrown in a few in, is Florence Nightingale. And Queen Victoria herself. Both of those are completely out of the score for the moment, but just wait.
Cream has been put forward as a suspect for Jack the Ripper, although he was in prison in Illinois in the USA at the time of the Ripper murders, which I think writes him off conclusively. The Cream theory originates from the fact that the hangman Billington, whilst on the scaffold hanging Cream, heard the words "I'm Jack the" as the trapdoor was sprung, and then it was cut off by the rope.
Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, creator of Sherlock Holmes, speculated on a Jill the Ripper. If a man was in disguise as a midwife, he could move about the streets with blood-stained clothes, undetected.
Chapman does remain a plausible suspect. He was, of course, a different sort of killer when apprehended at the turn of the century. He was poisoning wives. Now, this is a far cry from a lust killer murdering prostitutes.
If you are fascinated with the mystery of Jack the Ripper, you are a Ripperologist. Using modern FBI profile techniques is one tool this historian used to focus on self-proclaimed Dr. Rosalind Donston as a very plausible Ripper. It started with his wielding a sword when he was 18 years old as a surgeon and soldier in Giuseppe Garibaldi's Italian campaign in 1855.
And bit by bit, over a long period, as I managed to find out about his service with Garibaldi, I managed to find out his medical experience, I managed to find out his association with prostitutes, I managed to find that 5 people independently at a later date were pointing to him as the Ripper, or potentially the Ripper. Most important of all, in 1896, W.T. Stead, the former editor of the Pall Mall Gazette that Johnston used to write for, actually in print in his magazine Borderland said that for a whole year I believed him to be the veritable Jack the Ripper.
Donston was in the perfect location to perpetrate the murders. He placed himself as a patient at a London hospital, located a few blocks from Bucks Row, scene of the first murder.
His actual capacity to become a serial killer died, of course, with his failure in health. He was no longer, after 1889, capable of another cycle of murders.
The theories that intrigue people the most involve the Royal House of Windsor. It is a shocking thought that a member of the monarchy, the head of a great nation, could actually be involved in the crimes of Jack the Ripper. It all centers on this man, the black sheep of the royal household, Prince Edward Albert, Duke of Clarence, was grandson of Queen Victoria and heir to the throne. Physically weak and poor in his studies, he was a target of gossip, especially about his sexuality. He died in 1892 of influenza or syphilis. The stories vary. theories began in earnest when Sir Thomas Stowell published an article in 1970 stating that Sir William Gull, physician to the Queen, committed the murders with the Prince, who was in the delusionary stage of syphilis and was somehow compelled to slaughter prostitutes.
And in that way, you know, leaps and bounds, almost like a fantasy game, the Duke of Clarence was dragged in for the first time. That immediately attracted worldwide attention because anything to do with the royal family sells newspapers.
Then, in 1973, a bizarre new twist. The Prince had fathered a daughter with an East End Catholic woman. Gull and Freemasons covered up for the Prince.
And the whole thing was a Masonic conspiracy to save the crown, because the Duke of Clarence had done something he shouldn't have done. He had married a Roman Catholic lady and had a child by her, and that was death for the royal family. So, in fact, all the people who knew about it had to be eliminated. There were 5 prostitutes.
According to that theory, Gull and the Prince rode through Whitechapel in a coach and sought out Mary Kelly and the 4 other prostitutes. They mutilated the bodies and lay them on the street to be found by the police. The most recent theory involves a brilliant but strange young man, J.K. Stephen. He was hired as a tutor for Prince Eddie.
The royal family had no idea about that J.K. Stephen was a homosexual and had personal problems. And they developed a very strong relationship between them. Very strong.
When the prince became engaged to marry, an infuriated Stephen went on a murderous rampage of prostitutes, with Prince Eddie as his lookout.
J.K. Stephen, who I think was Jack the Ripper, was a loner to some extent. But he was more than a lust murder. He really wanted to kill the woman piece by piece.
If any of these theories are true, there was a cover-up of majestic proportions. That the heir to the English throne was either an accomplice to the Ripper murders or Jack the Ripper himself is the stuff of bestsellers and television movies. A few years ago, a diary surfaced that has caused much debate and great excitement. James Maybrick supposedly wrote that he committed the Ripper murders.
James Maybrick was a Liverpool cotton merchant who died in 1889 and whose wife was convicted on very dubious evidence of having poisoned him. A journal turned up in Liverpool in 1992 which purported to be Maybrick's and to be a confession that he was Jack the Ripper. Very few of us believe it. The diary is not in Maybrick's handwriting. There is internal evidence to suggest that it is not a genuine piece of work with knowledge of the murders, and an examination of the inks appears likely to show in the long run that it is definitely a modern forgery.
He fails in too many ways. He just fails the test. But again, it's one of those tantalizing, every time you hear something new and you hear about a new possibility, you jump at it hoping, you know, this is the one. We're going to find out who he was.
I think there is evidence about, but people don't always realise whether they've got, simply because the legends are taken over. The films blur the issue. I mean, I've been astonished at the number of people, for instance, they look at the Michael Caine film, Jack the Ripper, and say, oh, the mystery solved. It's not. I mean, the whole thing, about 99% of it is fiction. But for a lot of people, that's the solution to the case. So, therefore, if they do come across evidence, if they do come across documentation, they're not going to put it forward because they think the mystery has been solved. It hasn't. And that's one of the things we need to sort of get over, that we are still looking for the identity of Jack the Ripper.
Nobody really knew what was within him. Nobody knew what he was thinking. Nobody knew his feelings. And at the same time also, he was afraid that he might be discovered, which was one reason as to why he couldn't be found.